SnowRunner features a realistic landscape deformation mechanic that allows the player to interact with the terrain in a dynamic and immersive way. The game uses a physics engine that simulates the interaction between the vehicle and the terrain, taking into account factors such as gravity, friction, and momentum. When the player drives through the snow or mud, the vehicle leaves behind deep tracks that persist over time. This means that other vehicles driving through the same area, or the same vehicle driving through that area again in the future, will encounter the same tracks and be affected by them. The deformation also applies to water, with vehicles leaving behind a wake as they drive through the water. This terrain deformation mechanic adds a layer of strategic depth to the gameplay, as players must carefully choose their path and avoid getting stuck in deep mud or snow. The player must also be mindful of other vehicles that have passed through the terrain before them and adjust their driving accordingly. The deformation mechanic also creates a sense of immersion and realism that makes the driving experience more engaging. Players can see the deformation of the terrain visually, with mud or snow sticking to the vehicle and changing the appearance of the vehicle as they drive. Overall, the landscape deformation mechanic in SnowRunner is a great example of a game feature that adds both strategic depth and immersive realism to the gameplay. By simulating the interaction between the vehicle and terrain, SnowRunner creates a challenging and engaging driving experience that requires the player to adapt their strategy and approach to the specific terrain and environmental hazards. It's a great example of how game developers can use terrain deformation to create a more engaging and immersive gameplay experience. In order to achieve these results, there are a few things that need to happen. We would need to create blueprints. We'd create variables in the blueprint to track the deformation of the terrain. These variables can include the position of the vehicle, the depth of the tracks created, and the texture of the terrain. We would add event triggers such as activating the deformation when the vehicle interacts with the terrain. These triggers can include hitting the ground, accelerating, or braking, or turning. Configuring the deformation. In order to achieve this, we would configure the deformation effect to create the desired effect. This effect can be achieved by using various techniques such as vertex displacement, tessellation, or texture-based displacement. We would create a material instance in the blueprint that would apply the deformation to the terrain. This material instance can include the texture that will be modified as well as the parameters for the deformation effect. We would apply the deformation effect to the terrain using the material instance in that blueprint. Thank you.